thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees, of a blue, true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I who have died am alive again today, and this is the Son's birthday. This is the birthday of life and love and wings and of everything that is gay and great and happening earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing, all that is lifted from the no of all nothing, human, merely being, doubt, unimaginable you. Now the ears of my ears awake, now the eyes of my eyes are open. These wonderful words from the poet E. E. Cummings introduce the topic of the knowing no and the resounding yes. As people of faith, the yeses and nos of life give way to our awakenings. Now the ears of my ears awake, now the eyes of my eyes are open. In this sermon, we will touch on the power of everyday choices in which we say yes and no as such responses that are rooted in the authentic self and shape our religious and spiritual journeys every day. Throughout history, every great religious tradition has dominant themes that speak of the authentic life of the great spiritual heroes. The journey and the choices in which he and she would say yes and no to that which would serve to awaken one to the greater life. So when we study the great traditions and myths and legends, and we track time in culture through antiquity, we recognize how history presents the challenges to take a stand and find the courage and the grace of saying the necessary yeses and the nos of life. And yet, it's not just a theme for those who have led, the Moseses, the Elijahs, the Jesuses throughout history. It's a theme for all of us, a call to be ourselves and come to the altar of our own lives, reaching for the resurrection of the soul. Growing up in the Baptist and Pentecostal traditions, as an adult, I became a Unitarian Universalist. And it was in this rich history of UUs that I discovered the power of the religious and political no's. Unitarians know a great deal about the no in life, for they are largely made up of a community of rebels, radicals, and self-claimed heretics. As a result, they've left their mark on history, from their origins in Transylvania, in which they stood up to certain religious traditions that opposed the religious rights of others, through this past century, when Unitarians aligned themselves with the Jews, all the way, in many cases, to the gas chambers. They knew the knowing knows. And yet, every denomination and faith tradition has its own challenges, successes, and failures in the learning when to take a stand to the knowing no, even in fear and trembling, for the sake of a higher power and value that's inherent in the yes. So we see throughout history, religious movements, denominations, communities, and individuals like ourselves who must be willing to know ourselves well enough to know when it's that moment in time to say no, not just for the sake of saying no, but because there is a yes that is inherent in the no, that is reaching to come out in our religious lives. Without a no, yes is usually impossible. Who among us has had an effort to give oneself to a larger vision of grace, but has not known that the no can be most difficult? Who has not known what it means to be an outcast in order to touch the creative power, often born in suffering, that leads to the freedom of the divine yes? Sometimes it's in a neighborhood. Sometimes it's in the workplace, in the office. Sometimes it's within the family itself. And yet, on a personal level, what makes the knowing no possible when we look to religious history, culture, and our own life stories, we begin to explore that no is never enough. It's only a segue to the yes. The yes in life that begins, because life begins in the yes, but it has to be anchored in the no. The human story begins with a yes. Someone, somewhere, some energy in the process of conception has said yes. And many yeses to move through the womb to birth. But to move into the living world as we know it, labor becomes the great drama of tension. The first active tension of the struggle in the human being between the yeses and the nos. Until there's a point in the mother's genetic, physical, and emotional yes that hooks up with the yes of the infant, and it overrides the no's until it somehow becomes safe enough through hard labor to burst into new life. The knowing no was present, but it gave way to the resounding yes for more life. A daily story, perhaps, for all of us. A no sooner the cord is cut, and the infant task is to learn more about no's. In fact, development can't take place without sufficient no's. Life may be in the yeses, but the making of the no is critical. For it is the no that fosters autonomy of self, that is self is made possible, the ground in which we stand. Without the strength of the self that must be able to experience no, the emotional, social, and spiritual life becomes stunted.